became the tyrant he had only hinted at being before. Upon arrival at Jonestown, all members of the People's Temple had their passports and any medication confiscated by Jones. They lived in cramped cabins in the 3,800-acre compound and were all required to work in the burning jungle sun, where they were besieged by mosquitoes and tropical disease. Food was scarce or was possibly withheld by Jones to encourage subservience. Most meals consisted of some form of rice, and so they ate rice for breakfast, rice soup at lunch, and rice and beans for dinner, with the occasional vegetables. The elderly or sick were allowed to eat eggs, while Jones claimed he had low blood sugar and would eat separately from the congregation, as he would eat meat when no one else was allowed. If anyone questioned Jones's authority, they would be inflicted with harsh punishments. Jones had initially promised to those who moved to Jonestown that he would stop the corporal.
Oh, this dude is like really, it's like, this is some real, like, dark cult leader shit. Like, it's not even, you know, it's not even like, kind of like, just stealing like their money, like having them, like the congregation give them money and whatnot, and they're just like living these lavish lives and what the hell, whatever the hell. I mean, he made the move from another country. He confiscated their passports. So he basically kidnapped them. Like it was like a willing kidnapping. Like they willingly moved from one country to another, but they were kidnapped once they arrived. That sucks. I mean, yeah, that's crazy. Especially the fact that, again, it was hundreds of people. Like, he did this to hundreds of people. He had hundreds of passports stored so that people couldn't leave, and he would withhold food from them. Food, essential to live. Like it's essential to life, and he withheld food from them on purpose so that they can be more subservient to him. He is a Kool-Aid guy, yeah, and which is why that term was coined after him, which is like drink the Kool-Aid. That's how bad it is, and that's how fucked up this situation in this case is, that it's a term that people use, not like on a daily basis, but it's a term that's used amongst people. Like, they say that shit about CrossFit. Oh, you drank that Kool-Aid. Wow, like, do you understand, like, how bad a situation has to be? How fucked up that they made, like, there's a phrase made that was created because of it that is still used to describe things like that? Insane.
Beatings. But within an hour, he broke that promise. He refused to allow anyone to leave the property of Jonestown, and Jones reportedly began drugging people who were on duty at outposts to keep them from running away. Furthermore, he was said to secretly drug the people who wanted to dissent to keep them compliant. Soon, guards armed with guns began patrolling the perimeter, reportedly to keep people out, but also to force people to stay within.
Well, Okami, the thing is, one cult leader used the power of manipulation to make a whole bunch of people do something to themselves, while the other one, through the power of persuasion and manipulation, made a group of people commit various heinous crimes. in this case, obviously the Jim Jones would be the main villain. In the Manson family, they're all like, that whole group was just, they were all completely fucked up. And all the ones that went into that committed the actual murder, that's crazy right there. That's pretty insane. You are absolutely right, Tori. They must be in a very, that's what I think, they must be in a state of vulnerability, or just like not necessarily that they're not completely here, but there's a certain disconnect, and they find this person that's telling them these things that they want to hear, and they just gravitate towards it. I mean, it can happen in a lot of situations, even if it's not intended to cause harm. For example, I think that it happens. It's like kind of a culty vibe. Like, for example, like when you, I don't know, like, well, I guess I was gonna say like maybe like the power of like words and music to cause effect in you and whatnot, but it's just overall words are, like I said, they're just powerful, and they hold a lot of weight to them, as we can obviously see here. This is a pretty fucking good example of it. I mean, whoa. And you are right, Tori, both men are pretty sick. Moving on.
Initially, when people joined the People's Temple, they were required to sign either a blank piece of paper that Jones would later fill in, or a typed piece of paper whose words Jones would cover as they signed. He was petrified of people leaving him and did everything he could to prevent it. If someone attempted to leave Jonestown, Jones would fill in the signed page in order to blackmail them into staying. Often, he would fill in the pages to keep the custody of people's children. That way, they couldn't leave without abandoning their own kids. Under those circumstances, many stayed. Jones began conducting his sermons over the loudspeakers, which often continued for 6 hours a day, and he started holding meetings at night. His followers began worrying about his worsening mental state and drug use. It wasn't long after arrival that Jones actually had a throne erected in the main pavilion. Soon, all members' phone calls and letters were monitored and censored to control what information was released. And Jones began expecting people to report on each other if they caught someone breaking any of his rules. As part of his paranoia, Jones reportedly became obsessed with how he would be remembered in history, and would grow furious at the way he and his beliefs were being ridiculed by the media. He believed he was being cheated out of his rightful place in history. As Jones's obsession grew, he would reportedly conduct loyalty tests that involved practicing mass suicide. He would wait.
Fortunately, maybe it wasn't the way he thought it was going to be, but the fucker ended up being correct, because he is pretty unforgettable in a bad way. Words are very powerful, Tori. Which is why a lot of people like to take back what they say, or a lot of people lie. I think when someone lies to you, it's you hold power over that person enough to have that person lie, basically. That's how powerful words are. Words can save or destroy. So obviously this is a clear example of the destroy part. It can obviously save, because there's many, clear examples of that, but the flip side of it is situations like this. It is. I'm just shrugging. It's just we're already starting with, it's already getting deeper into Jonestown and all of the crazy shit that this man would do. Mind you, this went on for a long time. It's like, they'll probably say how long it was. I think so far they've been there for a year or two. So they've been there for quite some time under these circumstances. Like, yeah, that's insane. And the signing of, the custody of the kids, that's creepy as fuck, dude. That's like next level blackmail shit. Will do.
Wake up his followers in the dead of night and give them each a cup filled with a red liquid that he said was poison, and ordered that they drank it. They only passed if they drank without question. Jones would wait up to an hour after they drank to tell them that it hadn't been poisoned and they weren't going to die. Jones responded to the public's reproach of these actions by saying, "We will die unless we are granted freedom from harassment and asylum." Followers began escaping the People's Temple, afraid of what Jones was capable of. Some of those who escaped formed a group called Concerned Relatives to oppose Jones. The group met to detail what they had experienced while part of the People's Temple, and plan on how to save those whom they left behind. They claimed that Jones was keeping people trapped in Jonestown against their will, and that they required public and governmental help to free them. At the time, they were getting some publicity, but nothing like what they needed to take down an established leader like Jones, who had thousands still supporting him. Among those who went to the Guyana Jonestown with Jones was his reported son with Grace Stowen, John Victor. Grace had actually fled to escape and was forced to leave her son behind. Grace Stowen left the temple long before the move to Jonestown, and she claimed to have defected after Jones waved a gun at her and threatened to shoot her if she fell asleep during a planning commission meeting. Then she reportedly witnessed a 40-year-old woman being mistreated after disagreeing with Jones's methods. Once free, Grace began appealing to the US and Guyana government to help her regain custody of her son, and even disputed that Jones was the father, as Victor's birth certificate listed her husband, Tim Stowen, as the father. Victor had originally gone to Jonestown with Tim, who then later defected from the temple and left his son there in Jones's care. In 1978, Tim, who was actually an attorney who graduated from Stanford Law School, then joined Grace, his now estranged wife, and her efforts. Tim met with Congress members in Washington to gain support and explain in detail the exact objections he had against Jones. Simultaneously, Deborah Layton Blakely began publicly condemning Jones and the People's Temple. She even went so far as to write an 11-page detailed affidavit to the US government titled, "The Threat and Possibility of Mass Suicide by Members of the People's Temple." Blakely had been a member since she was 18 and had originally joined to bring structure and self-discipline to her own life. She revealed that she worked as the financial secretary for the temple, and that she had witnessed Jones's deviation from its message of equality and social change as he became more tyrannical and paranoid. She claimed that he met all opposition from members with threats and as treason. He reportedly threatened all black members of the temple by saying that if they did not go to Guyana with him, they would be forced into concentration camps where they would die. And he alleged that he had connections with the mafia and the Soviet government, which...
Dude, that fucking sucks right there. That's crazy. I mean, at least the effort of trying to save the other people that are there, this is when it actually started. It made its way all the way to Congress, to the U.S. Congress. That says a lot about how the People's Temple was already being perceived to the public. So, what started off in his mind as roses ended up being just he was just being delusional, because I don't understand how he thought he was going to get away with any of these things. Kidnapping, stealing, blackmail, a whole bunch of things. How did he think he was going to get away with it? Like, I don't understand. Again, the fact that it made its way all the way to to U.S. Congress, and they made a report talking about mass suicide. Yeah, it's because there was a lot being said about that the People's Temple and about Jim Jones that worried the higher ups enough for them to make a whole report on it. Yeah, that's crazy. Appreciate everyone being here.
Used in threats to keep people compliant. Blakely stated that Jones demanded loyalty above all else, and that his ideal loyalty was expressed by giving up everything, even basic necessities. The most loyal were in the worst physical condition. Dark circles under one's eyes or extreme loss of weight were considered signs of loyalty. Blakely had still been a member when Jones learned that Grace and Tim Stowen were seeking the U.S. government's aid to retrieve their son from Jonestown. Jones responded with angry tirades and threatened that as long as John Victor was in Guyana, they would never get their son back. The Stowens incited hysteria in Jonestown, with Jones trying to pay people up to $10,000 to silence Tim Stowen. Jones later threatened mass suicide of all Temple members if the Stowen custody case was not stopped. When the court case was delayed, they called off the threat. Eventually, in November 1977, a San Francisco court officially granted Grace Stowen custody of her son, John Victor. However, the court order meant that Jones was now unable to return to the U.S. without being brought to court for not returning the child. But the court order also meant that Jones couldn't allow John Victor ever to leave Jonestown because he would be legally taken from him. When Tim flew to Guyana to retrieve John Victor, he was prevented from even entering Jonestown. The Guyanese judge who was supporting his claim removed himself from helping in the case because his life had been threatened. Tim eventually had to return to the U.S. without his son when his visa expired. He reportedly feared that if he persisted, he would end up a corpse. In the affidavit to the U.S. government, Blakely went on to describe how, in response to the growing criticism and possible threats from the outside, Jones began something called White Nights. White Nights would occur about once a week and begin with Jones declaring a state of emergency in Jonestown. The entire congregation would be woken by deafening sirens, and about half of them would have to arm themselves, mostly with rifles, and ensure that everyone in Jonestown was awake and ready in case of a real emergency.
Dude, they were armed. Like, he literally had them on the worst lockdown and confinement. I mean, you have all of the things taken away from you. You can't leave. You don't have paperwork, you don't have a passport, you don't have money, and then on top of all that, oh yeah, they've been armed, but again, they've been armed. That makes sense. Where'd they get the guns? They didn't bring them from the U.S. This is so insane to me. It blows my mind. The level of manipulation, it's fucking crazy.
Jones treated each white night like a real crisis and required everyone to do the same. There would then be a huge meeting where Jones would often claim that the jungle was filled with deadly mercenaries ready to attack